Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala Sayyid al-Awwaleen wal Akhirin. Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabi. Wa man da'a bi da'watihi wa stanna bi sunnati ila yawmiddin. Wa sallam tasliman kathira. Amma ba'd. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last. And may peace also be extended to his family, his companions, to all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters, I begin with the greeting words of paradise. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this opportunity again in the glorious month of Ramadan to be able to reflect upon some of the issues that are facing the Muslims. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had informed us in Surah Al-Baqarah and the oft-repeated verses, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان, that the month of Ramadan is the time in which the Quran was revealed, guidance to humanity and clear evidence to separate truth and falsehood, and this comes from the guidance and from the Furqan. And that Furqan, that ability to separate truth from falsehood, is an extremely important challenge to Muslims today, when there is so much information, there are so many different opinions, and there are literally systems, huge economic systems, battling for power in the world. And so, for the believers, for those who want to merely submit to Allah Azza wa Jal, in many cases it appears to be extremely confusing. But one of the great blessings in the month of Ramadan is that during the daylight hours, we continue with our normal activities, but we're not eating, we're not drinking, we're not involved in sexuality. And so by taking away these animal desires, the desires to eat, to procreate, then we literally are changing our condition in the world itself. And you could say that this is like an angelic state, because the angels do not have desires. يَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. They do what they are commanded. And so this angelic state allows us to look at things, to analyze, not just surface understanding, but to go through the surface and to reflect upon the essence of the issues that we are looking at. Today we want to look at a very serious issue that I consider to be, after Tawheed and Shirk, after monotheism and polytheism, I consider this to be one of the top 5 issues that Muslims have to face. And I also firmly believe that if we do not deal with this issue in the proper way, according to the Quran itself and the example and guidance of Rasulullah ﷺ, that this could lead to the destruction of the house of Islam. A building can go up that does not have a strong foundation. This particular area is women and Islam. It is the area of the women. And this is an area that in many cases is sort of put to the side. It's not really given its gravity and its weight. But when we look at the Muslim world itself, when we look at our communities, we recognize that a large percentage of the community are women. And if you count also girls, then we're talking about possibly 40% or more of the community. We're talking about a huge percentage of the community youth males make up a large percentage, and adult males make up a large percentage. But women make up an extremely important part of the community. And maybe I should even turn it around and say 60%. If you look at women and girls, it may be more like 60%. But we're talking about a crucial aspect or crucial part of the House of Islam. And I ran into this issue personally in traveling throughout the Muslim world. And I traveled as a young Muslim, innocent, having read the books and the descriptions of Islam from the sources, and then traveling in the Muslim world. And as I traveled in the Muslim world itself, I began to find that there were realities on the ground that were not the same as what is ideally projected. Okay? We have a model in front of us, and we have reality. And our struggle is to get to the model, to get as close to the ideal as possible. What I found in many countries, that there was a lot of attention being paid to the graves of saints and individuals. In one country, and I won't say which country it is, I walked down the street and went through the bazaar and then came into the masjid area, and there was a grave. And there were people there worshiping at the grave and praying and doing, Muslims and non-Muslims at the grave. Okay? And it was a big courtyard. And then the time for Asr came. And they called the adhan, and as I was going toward the main prayer area, which is under the closed part, I didn't want to describe it too much because some of you will know what I'm talking about. You got it already, huh? As I was going toward there, most of the people stayed at the grave. And only a few people made Salat al-Asr. And I recognized that some of those people were Muslims. So they pay more attention to praying to the saint than praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this began to inform me as to what the problem is, the contradiction, the difference between our ideal and our reality. In some countries, as you enter in order to get your position or to get things done, you got to give a little bribe, a little rishwa, a little bakshish, and then you can get things done. Right? But this is not the Islamic model. And so, as I was traveling through one of the countries, and we passed some madrasas, and the brothers said to me, you know, these are Quran schools. And I said, mashallah. He said, these are for the boys. So I said, okay, do you have Quran schools for the girls? And he said, no, Brother Abdullah. No. We don't have for the boys. Okay, and then I'm saying to myself, what religion is this? This is not what I was reading in the original sources. This is something different. It is an emphasis which is being, placed upon the males within the community. And in some cases, they even looked at educating the women as a problem. The more you educate them, the more problems you're going to have. And this is the opposite of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions. In one case, we had a halaqah session for sisters in the Jami Mosque some years ago here in Western Toronto. And in one of the discussions, we were talking about culture. And one of the women said in her country, and I'm not going to say which one it is, she said that I was taught that a woman would not enter paradise unless she got a beating from her husband. Now, I didn't make this up. She said she would not enter paradise unless she got a hiding or a beating from her husband. I said, what religion is this? What are you talking about? But that was what they were taught in their folk culture. So the difference between the folk culture and the reality of Islam in some cases, was a huge case. It was a huge difference between the two. And what I also found, and this was disturbing, and I'm being very honest with you because this is a serious topic, that even brothers who were Islamic movement people, now I'm not talking about a regular Muslim who just makes salat and fasts in Ramadan and eats halal food, and no, I'm talking about somebody who's dedicating themselves to Islam, to Islamic education, Islamic movement, masjid, whatever it is. This is what I mean by a movement person, multazim. So this person is now committed. Okay, I found a phenomena happening from the 70s and 80s, 90s. It's still there, where even committed Muslims, males, spend a lot of their time controlling their wife. And they felt that the more that they controlled her, if they locked her down, put her on the side, wrapped her up, the more she was locked down is the stronger he felt he was in a state of Islam. The more she was locked down. And some would even pride themselves at how much control they have over their wife. And the results of this are obvious, because many of the movements where this machoistic attitude came amongst the brothers, and I found this on the ground, in many of the movements where the brothers could not get along with each other, or if somebody disagrees with another one, they turn to violence. Right? In these cases where they kept women out of Islamic activities, when they had power, when Allah gave them power, they started fighting each other. They were too cold. They were too machoistic and male-dominated oriented. They did not have that balance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given male and female. And there's a reason for it. And so we want to look at this, because this is a serious issue for the younger generation. And it is one of the hot issues, one that is confusing a lot of the Muslims. And so I want to touch on this with you and to share with you some information that I've been sharing with communities and discussing all over North America and Europe, discussing this situation so that we can start to think about this, to implement this in our own lives. When we look at the Muslim world, we find that the Muslims have gone through a lot of changes, especially in the last 50 years. And if you look at the Muslim world, you will find that from the 19th century, it was around 1885 or so, there was a big conference in Berlin amongst the European powers. And in the Berlin conference, the European powers took a map of the world and they literally divided the world into sections of interest. So they said, British, you take that part. French, you take this. Italian, you take this. Dutch, Belgium, Portuguese, Spanish, they divided it up into sections. And they went forward to establish the colonial period. And this is not just a period where they had forts or they had compounds on our coastline. The colonial period is where they conquered our countries. And because of the technology that they had and the backwardness that had hit the Muslim world and other parts of the so-called third world, they were able to go into the Muslim countries with small numbers and play one tribe against another tribe or one group against another group, and they were able to conquer large populations and large bits of area. And they established this colonial period. And in the colonial period, we find that they established capitalism. And capitalism, to put it in simple terms, is the free market system where you have private ownership and everybody has their own property. You have rich and poor. Okay, so they established this capitalist system. And they tried it in the Muslim world. Now, the Muslim world, in most cases, had kings and royal families. So the kings and royal families, they got right into this because they would be on the top of the capitalist system. This is the feudal system that has, you know, the rich and the poor people. And this was tried in the Muslim countries, but it failed. It failed to meet, especially when the 20th century came. And when people were now struggling for their rights and they wanted independence, the capitalist system was falling apart. So therefore, when a new system came up called socialism, and this is the system of sharing, where you don't have rich and poor, everybody's supposed to be equal. So the wealth is divided amongst the people. So they call it the socialist system, which eventually they hoped would go into a communist system. Okay? And socialism seemed like a very interesting system to the Muslim world. And so many Muslim countries started to develop this. Socialist movements were developed in Muslim countries and took over large swaths of areas. North Africa, the Middle East, many parts of the Muslim where the socialists were rising in these countries. But the problem with socialism is that socialism has baggage. Now, what do I mean by baggage? It brings something with it. Socialism brings atheism because the hardcore socialists, they don't believe in God. They believe in a materialistic system. Okay, so if you believe in God, they consider religion to be the opium of the people. That's what they called it. So if you become too religious, it's like smoking opium. You're going to get high with religion, and you're useless in society. And it reached the point where in Tunisia, and I can say the country, one of their leaders called Bourguiba, he actually said, he decided one year he was going to ban Ramadan. He's going to say, no more fasting in my country. Because when you fast, you sleep too much. And we need work. So this year you're going to work extra for Ramadan. There's going to be no fasting in Tunisia. And the Muslim world rose up against him, and he had to take it back. But the fact that he had the nerve to say this showed the weakness, right? But the Muslims saw by moves like this that socialism is not going to work. And we're still suffering from this now. The Ba'athist party that was in Iraq and now in Syria, still the confusion in Syria, you can trace it back to the Ba'athist party to a great extent. So socialism, not going to work. So what happened in a nutshell is that from the 60s, whenever the election was called in a Muslim country, and you can see it up until now, whenever there is election, if there is an Islamic party who is running for power, they will win the election. If you have a democratic election in any of the Muslim countries right now, and you have an Islamic party in it against a capitalist or a socialist party, atheist, whatever, in most cases, 9 out of 10 cases, the Islamic party is going to win the election. Because Muslims gave up on capitalism, they gave up on socialism, and the only thing that was left is Islam. But the problem for the Muslim parties, for the Muslims who gain power, is how do you practice Islam in the 21st century now? Because we went to sleep for a couple hundred years, and the world changed. There's a world economy now, there's technology, now there's internet. Like the world has changed. So how do you practice Islam in the 20th century? That is the challenge of the Muslim countries. That's what the younger generation is going to have to go through. How can we practice our Islam and yet still be part of the modern world, right? And not lose a technology but maintain a value system, right? How do we do this? This is not our topic tonight, but I want to use that as an example. Because women in Islam were facing sort of a similar issue. And that is that the Prophet ﷺ, when he came, to the Arabian Peninsula, he found an extremely oppressive society. If a family had too many girl children, they would literally, the father would take one of the girls and bury her alive. Could you imagine this? And his descriptions of a person burying his daughter. She's playing with his beard. And he's burying her alive. He got too many girls, man. It's going to be a problem. You know how cold you have to be to do something like this? That's where the revelation came. And it addressed it directly. Infanticide. It also was a case where unlimited amount of women could be married. A man could be married to 25 women. And when he dies, his son inherits all of the women, including his mother. That's how socialistic, that's how chauvinistic and, seriously oppressive they were, right? That's the environment. So when Islam came and then established rights for everybody, a man has a right, a woman has a right, revelation for everybody, this was a total revolution. Nowhere in the world, not in Europe, not in China, not in India, nowhere did women have rights. So Islam established rights for women in this dark period and then spread to different parts of the world. Over the centuries, you have healthy Islam and you have weak and sick Islam. In the colonial period, I believe, we went down into a dark stage. The lights were going out. The men became frustrated. And then we find abuse coming back in. We find it happening. We find certain things happening in our families, especially when we travel to different countries. These things never happened before, but they started to happen within our countries, and Allah knows best, it could be part of that frustration that Muslims felt, the male Muslims felt, because the power was taken away from them by the colonial system. So they'd take it out on their family. And so the man then became tyrannical. So the women of Islam in the 20th century, just like Muslims were looking for a way out of capitalism, right? And they went to socialism. Women needed a way out. There were many bright Muslim girls. They needed a way out of this. Which direction you going to go in? Right? Muslim men seemed to be oppressive. A system was coming up in the 20th century. This was called the feminist movement. And the feminist women's liberation movement, which came out of Europe, came to the Americas, it was fighting for the rights of women. And there was a lot of truth in that movement. Because women in Europe and America, they did not get the same salary. The Christian church, up until the 20th century, many churches believed that a woman did not have a soul. That was a belief amongst them. We didn't 1,400 years ago, we knew that. But up until the 20th century, many of their churches said a woman is a soulless creature. So women were extremely oppressed in Europe. They were oppressed here as well. So the feminist movement was fighting for wages, fighting for rights. Muslim women looked at the feminist movement and they said, maybe that's the way out for us. So you started to find Muslim feminists. Okay? This is a Muslim woman who wants her liberation, and she takes on the feminist movement. But similar to the socialist movement that has baggage in it, it carries atheism, right? Feminist movement has got baggage. Because feminist movement also has atheism, and in some extreme cases, it works against the family. It will actually break down your family. So the feminist movement, it started falling apart. And then you started noticing, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, you started noticing women in hijab all over the Muslim world started coming. I traveled to Tunisia. That was in early 2000s. And I was surprised when I went to Tunisia, and that was, that socialist society where they banned the hijab. It was a really bad place for Muslims to struggle. There were 2 out of 3 of the women were wearing hijab. Another strange thing was many of the women who were wearing hijab and returning to their deen, they were educated women. This was a phenomenon going on. So now women are coming back into Islam. They don't see the feminist system, as a solution. They come into Islam. The challenge is, how can a Muslim woman gain her rights, understand her role in Islam within the limits of Islam, without having to go to the feminist movement? This is a really serious issue. And this is on the ground one of the big issues facing Muslims in the university systems, those coming up now, especially in Europe, in North America, but in some parts of the Muslim world as well. And so this oppression and this baggage, the solution, as it was with socialism and capitalism, is to go back to the Islamic system, which is not socialism and it's not capitalism. You have individual free property, but there's no control like capitalism. You pay zakat, you have Baitul Mal, you have a treasury house. And so you have a socialist system without the force, without the terror of the socialists. You can share your wealth. Similarly, within Islamic teachings, there is room within our teachings for women to gain their rights. But this is going to require a new analysis of the role of male and female, and a new analysis of women in Islam. One of the key issues is the relationship of men to women. Now we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made men the leaders. The Quran is saying al-rijalu qawwamuna ala nisa, right? Bima faddala Allahu ba'dahum ala ba' wa bima anfaqu min amwalihim. Men are maintainers and protectors of women because Allah has given them an advantage and they pay from their wealth. Qawwam, the Amir. The man is the Amir of the house. But what does the Amir mean? This is a power relationship. In our societies, we have a problem too in our Jamaats. What does the Amir of the Jamaat mean? What does the leader mean? In many of our countries, the leader is like the king-like figure, the sultan figure, and everybody's low. And in some countries, the Amir, when he drives from his house to his office, the police are standing on the street 2 hours before to protect him when he comes by. Like, what are you running from, man? What are you afraid of? Right? That's not the Islamic system. When the Christians when the Romans were defeated in Jerusalem, and the Patriarch of Rome wanted to give the keys of the city to the Khalifa, the leader of the Muslims, they said, go to Medina. And they went and they found Amir al-Mu'mineen Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh. Where did they find him? They didn't find him in a palace surrounded by slaves and guards. They said, look under that tree over there. He's sleeping under the tree on this stone with his turban, and he's laying down sleeping by himself. That's Amir al-Mu'mineen. So he has no fear of his people. You see? It's a completely different concept of leadership. As our traditions say, Sayyid al-Qawm khadimuhum. The leader of the people is the servant of the people. So the Prophet ﷺ showed that leadership is not hierarchy, not up-down. It's more like a circle. You see? Up and down is master-slave, leader, followers, president, members, right? Top, bottom. But the circular one is that the leader is equal to other people in terms of materially, but they have more responsibility. So somebody has got to take the responsibility. It's mas'uliyah. That is what a leader really is in Islam. And so that concept is completely different that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ showed in terms of the leadership within our community. And the leadership in the family is the same. The emir of the family, the father, is the emir, but it does not mean he is the pharaoh. He's not a pharaoh, right? He's not a tyrant. Some men think that, they're the leader, so everything they say is the law, whether they're right or wrong. Anything they say is the truth. Anything they say must be followed. But that's not the way it was in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His companions could question him, right? And you'll see later, even with the great khulafa, that in some cases even women questioned them. They were able to question the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself about issues pertaining to the religion. And so the leadership then, it's a completely different concept. It's more of a circular concept, right, where the husband then recognizes the strengths of his wife. He recognizes the strength of the wife, and he makes the decision, as an emir should, based on shura, mutual consultation, just like the emir in the Jamaat is supposed to make the decision. What happens on the ground in many cases is something different. We find in cases women locked out, even Islamic movements. And I went to some conferences. Alhamdulillah, it's changed now. But I remember going to conferences and they had the men's section and the women's section, and the men were talking about, Tawheed, and they were talking about Islamic economics and, Islamic fiqh and jurisprudence, and the women were talking about Islamic cooking. What is the latest samosa, the designer samosa that you can make? Islamic economics, that's what they were talking about, right? The men were talking about, the fiqh, right, of the world, right? And it was totally unbalanced. Alhamdulillah, with more education, it's changing now. It's changing. And we're reaching that point. And Muslim women are speaking up for themselves. And this is where Muslim women need to see that they can speak up for themselves within the context of Islam and not have to go outside of Islam to feminism in order to gain solutions to the problem, because the rights had been granted clearly by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the great scholars in West Africa that I studied very deeply, Sheikh Uthman ibn Fudi, Uthman Danfodio they called him, rahimahullah. He was of the Fulani people of the desert, great Maliki scholar. He challenged his society. Women were being oppressed, ignorant, locked down, confused somewhere else. And he said to the brothers, to the society, educate the women. It's compulsory. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, Talabul ilm farida ala kulli Muslim. Seeking knowledge is compulsory on all Muslims. That's male and female. Later he found that the women were not being educated. He took a bold stand as a young scholar. And he said, I'm establishing a halaqah for women after Salat al-Asr. And if your husband does not obey you, disobey him and come to the halaqah. This is bold. And they came to him and they said, how dare you say this? What's your proof? And he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, La ta'a lil makhluq fi ma'siyat al-khaliq. There is no obedience to the creation when the creation disobeys Allah. So in other words, the leadership of a man in his house is not based on the fact that he's a man. It's based on the fact that he submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once his submission goes, then ta'ah also goes. Obedience also goes. So in other words, if a Muslim woman, may Allah forbid, is married to a man, and customs say that you're married to him for life, you have to be married to him, and this man, may Allah forbid, stops making salat, drinking wine, doing stealing, going outside the faith, she does not have to remain married to that man. Not just because he's a man that she has to remain. She goes to her wali, she brings in her family, and they deal with this man. If this man does not practice Islam, then the Sharia gives her the right to live under the law of Allah. And this is established directly from the early followers of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, directly from the relationship, or from the revelation. And so, obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the proper relationship between male and female. Also, the concept of marriage has to be is misunderstood. Many women don't understand what marriage really is. Many of the males don't understand it. What is an Islamic wedding? Most people say, well, it is barakah and mashallah, tabarakallah, you're married and it's all over and we sign this. No, it's not just that, man. When you marry according to the book of Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That's why you marry it. Right? And so this is a lot of information. And in many cases, and it's in Sharia, a woman has the right to stipulate certain conditions. This is called shurut al-aqd, the conditions of the marriage contract. She can stipulate certain things. So maybe they live in a foreign country and she wants to visit her family, once every 3 years, or she wants to finish her education, whatever. She can stipulate that in the marriage contract itself. This is within the laws within the Sharia. And the wali, the father or the wali, the guardian, who gives her away, is supposed to maintain his relationship. So if something is happening in that relationship, if violence is happening in the relationship, then the wali can actually step in. And in one Muslim country, I'm not saying which one it is, the walis were strong. There was some violence going on. So in this country, when they were about to get married, the man would come over to the house of the girl. And then they would be sitting in the majlis, and so now he didn't see her, so he's going to get a chance to see her. So she's helping to serve the food. Right? So he's seeing her, right? And, they're relating. And then, so he gets some time and he can even talk to her, whatever, a little bit. At the end of the food, the father then takes the young man and then gives him some punches. And the brothers and the uncles, they hit him, right? And the father says, if you touch my daughter, this is what you're going to get. You understand this? So he was putting that in the mind. If he ever thought of violence on that girl, he's going to remember that in back of her are rijal. There are men in back of her. See the concept of wali? Wali is not just sign the paper, Assalamu alaikum, I'll see you later. Like some religions, they put a dot on their head and they say, goodbye forever. If he dies, you go in the fire with him. No, man. That's not what Islam is. Islam gives rights to everybody under the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for those sisters who have embraced Islam and do not have a wali from their family, the Prophet ﷺ said, as-sultan wali man la waliya, that the authority becomes the guardian for those women who do not have guardians. And so therefore, it's crucial for our community, and we need to have a bigger discussion about this here, and maybe if people desire, we can go into this in details. But, through education, our community needs to have walis for the new Muslim sisters. Preferably a married couple, and the brother becomes the guardian to at least be able to represent her. It's more like a wakil, right? Not like a wali, because he doesn't have, decision-making power, but he represents her, right? And so this is crucial for the community to provide people like this for Muslim sisters. And so it is so important for our community to be sensitized to liberation, that we are liberated not only from the chains of shirk, Tawheed liberated us, but we're also liberated from oppression and abuse in our families. And when we go to the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we find that, the Sahabiyat, radiallahu anhunna, the Sahabiyat, female companions, were illustrious companions. The first person to embrace Islam was a woman, Khadija radiallahu anha. The first person to die for Islam was Sumayya radiallahu anha. Aisha radiallahu anha memorized over 2,000 hadiths. She reported the second most amount of hadiths amongst all of the companions. It's female, right? And you'll see many stories. I want to share with you in our limited time some highlights from the story of a great Sahabiyat. This was Salama radiallahu anha, the hidden advisor of the Prophet. She was like a minister of state, secretary of state in some countries. She's the hidden advisor. How did this come about? Her name was Hind bint Suhail of the Banu Makhzum. This was a high tribe in the Quraysh. And her husband, Abu Salama, was also Qurayshi. They were married, accepted Islam early in the early Meccan period. They went through a lot of the changes, and they migrated to Al-Habasha, to Abyssinia, and then they made the hijrah to Medina. And when they reached Medina, and the Quraysh had attacked the Muslims in the Battle of Badr, Abu Salama, the husband, was wounded fatally, and he actually passed away, radiallahu anh. And the Prophet ﷺ, then and the companions were very grieved by his death. He was an illustrious companion. And she was a well-known woman, and she was left without a husband. And after she finished her period of mourning, after it was over and she was eligible for marriage, a number of senior companions came to marry her. But she was an opinionated woman, right? You think women don't have anything to say, right? She's got a lot to say. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh came to her and said, I propose marriage to you. She said no. Umar ibn al-Khattab came to her and proposed marriage to her, and she said no. These are big people, right? Then the Prophet ﷺ came to her and he proposed to marry her. And she was a very opinionated person. Now look at this human relationship, right? She said, I have certain conditions. And I have to be honest with you and let you know. Number one, I am extremely jealous person. And I'm afraid that if I'm jealous of you, Allah is going to be angry with me. See how intelligent she is? So I'm an extremely jealous person. Secondly, I have a lot of children. And thirdly, I'm up in age, right? I'm older. The Prophet ﷺ then said, in terms of your jealousy, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take it away. In terms of age, I have the same problem as you. And in terms of your children, your family is my family. That's a beautiful saying. In Arabic, beautiful, right? Your family is like saying ahlan wa sahlan, right? Your family is my family. So she said, I accept. I accept. But see how she was? Opinionated, right? She was opinionated. And she played this role all throughout the life, the prophetic life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to his death. And she turned to be the oldest, the last of the wives of the Prophet to die. She was the senior amongst the women of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And to show you how she was his hidden advisor, I'll show you a narration. In this case, the narration goes that one day Salama came to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, O Messenger of Allah, I do not hear Allah mentioning women in the hijrah. She's opinionated, right? Allah's talking about the hijrah, but I don't see the women. Then, shortly after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in the Quran itself, in the 3rd chapter, Ali Imran, verse 195, then Allah said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, فَاسْتَجَابَ لَهُمْ رَبُّهُمْ أَنِّي لَا أُضِيعُ عَمَلَ عَامِلٍ مِّنْكُمْ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنْثَى بَعْضُكُمْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. And their Lord accepted their prayers. Never will I cause to be lost the work of any of you, whether male or female. You are offspring of one another. See this? The rights of women, male or female, mentioned in the Quran. There is no other revealed book where it's something as clear as this. Okay? And this is Salama, standing up for the rights of women within Islam, without going outside to another system, but within Islam, asking for her rights. Another example of how she was the hidden advisor of the Prophet ﷺ. After the Battle of Hudaybiyah, you remember that the Prophet ﷺ and his companions wanted to make Umrah, right? This is before the opening of Mecca. The Quraysh stopped them, and it seemed like there were going to be a confrontation. Finally, they agreed upon a sulh. It was an agreement, a treaty. And in that treaty, the Muslims had to go back to Medina. Don't make Umrah. It's like a defeat, right? And the companions were really upset. But it was actually a victory, because later on, when they came back the next year, they had the opening of Mecca was open for them, and it turned out to be so great that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it in the Quran in Fathan Mubina, that this was an open victory, okay, by making this treaty. The shahid here is that the Prophet ﷺ went to his companions and he said, okay, we have to break the ihram, sacrifice our animals and go back. They didn't make Umrah, right? Everybody was frozen. Nobody moved because they couldn't believe it, right? No, we came here to make Umrah. We're not afraid of them. Everybody froze. And the Prophet ﷺ, as a man, he felt some frustration. He went into his tent. Salama's watching, right? She was there. So Salama then said to him, this is your advisor, right? She then said to him, okay, if they're not following you, don't say it to them, do it. Because they're used to following you. Everything you do, they do. From Sunnah, right? So don't tell them to break ihram and cut hair and no, do it yourself. So he went outside, and then, he broke the ihram, cut the hair, sacrificed the animal. Everybody said, just went along and they started doing it themselves. You see that advice? That's practical advice that she was giving to him all the way through. And because of this, she became an expert on fine points of Sharia, especially dealing with foster relationship, the rida'a. When a woman breastfeeds a child, she becomes related to the child. So Salama was the expert on this, and the Sahabas used to come to her for this. Also, issues of talaq, of divorce. So whenever there was a divorce issue, they come to Salama. She was the expert on this. Okay, so she was faqiha. She was an expert in these particular issues, and she also she reported 387 hadiths came on Salama. Okay, so this is now the role of a Muslim woman, how important her role is and what she is actually able to do. And whenever you see a hadith where her name is in it, stop on it, because some very interesting things. I found one hadith, which is, maybe we'll have time in the future to talk about. It's a really interesting one. And this is an issue concerning intoxication. Because when the Mongols were coming across and conquering the Muslim world, they came across India. And they found hashish, opium. They were smoking drugs. So the Mongols took this and they started smoking opium. And as they were killing people, they were actually they were putting the people on drugs too. And they were drugging themselves. So they became what you could call the first international drug dealers, right? And they're moving from country to country. When they reached Syria, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, whose family had been from Baghdad, whose family fled from Baghdad because of the conquest and the slaughter of Baghdad. 3 million people, right? He made a really serious fatwa. Because the Mongols, when they come into an area, they're bringing drugs with them. And there's going to be a lot of drug addiction. So Ibn Taymiyyah made one of the most serious fatwas possible. And he said, if anybody is caught dealing drugs in our community, that person is to be executed and not buried in a Muslim grave. No janazah. Not even in a Muslim grave. Rarely do you hear a fatwa like this made by a scholar because of the scourge of drugs. It was destroying the communities. Now, the shahid in this hadith is the Mongols were looking toward Egypt. And in Egypt, which was the educational center of the Muslim world, because Baghdad had fallen, the ulama had a debate. This hadith is reported in Abu Dawood, and there's a sharh, an explanation called Awn al-Ma'bud, which is done by Sheikh Ibn al-Qayyim. And in the sharh, you'll get the explanation. The Mongols were carrying drugs. So the ulama sat and debated, what is the position of drugs? Is it khamar? Is it intoxication? Or is it not? The Hanafi school of thought believed that khamar has to be what is wet and flowing. So in other words, it's got to be like wine, beer, whiskey, it's wet. This hashish, marijuana, ganja, opium, it's dry, right? And it doesn't give you drunkenness. It gives you what the ulama call the muqaddama of drunkenness, the beginning of drunkenness. What we would call in modern language, we say he's high. That doesn't mean he's drunk, right? See the difference? So the ulama are saying, what are we going to do about this? It's not wet. It doesn't get you drunk. It gets you high, man. So what are we going to do about this? Like you're chewing too much qat, right? Like what are we going to do about this, right? This guy's up for 35 hours and he's running around, right? What are we going to do about this? In Awn al-Ma'bud, one of the scholars brought hadith reported on Salama radiyallahu anha, naha Rasulullah sallallahu an kulli muskirin wa muftir. Salama brought the hadith that the Prophet, peace be upon him, prohibited all forms of intoxication, whether they be alcoholic beverages or narcotics. Muskir is what makes you drunk, right? Sakran, right? And muftir would be narcotics. That's what makes you high. It's in the hadith. She said he prohibited all of it. And with that, the ulama were able to make a complete fatwa that we agree with this. We will stop all of these drugs from coming in. No ganja, no hashish, no opium, none of these drugs. And this is based on the hadith of Salama. Okay, so these are very important sayings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, reported by Salama, illustrious companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him. She died at 84 years old, 62 years after the Hijrah. 84 years old, last of the mothers to die. May Allah be pleased with her. And so these are the mothers of the believers. These are the stories of Islam where women have an illustrious path in Islam. Their rights are there. And if we practice Islam in the balanced way, then inshallah there would be rights for every sector in the community, and women can have their rights fulfilled as well as men without having to go outside of the Islamic system to another system and import this inside to bring it in to give a solution. Just like socialism, bringing socialism into Islam to solve our problem. It's not going to work because it's got the baggage of atheism. These other systems are not going to work because they're bringing too much baggage. But we need to bring back that spirit from the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So we pray that Allah would give us the balance and the understanding that everybody within our community, especially our sisters, can gain the rights, understand their role that given to them by Allah and His Messenger, and not given to them by oppressive systems or frustrated men. I leave you with these thoughts, and I ask Allah to have mercy on me and you. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.